Most companies don't realize how central emotions are to building the right culture. They tend to focus on cognitive culture, the shared intellectual values, norms, artifacts, and assumptions that set the overall tone for the employee, how employees think and behave at work. Though that's incredibly important, the authors, researchers show that it's only part of the story. The other critical part is emotional culture, which governs which feelings people and have and express at work. This was taken from Harvard Business Review on the topic of emotional culture and performance. A very warm welcome to season 3 of EI Cafe with Azeem. And I'm your host, Azeem Saheer, a human capital specialist, a Lego Serious Play Facilitator, and emotional intelligence practitioner. Here we are again for another episode of 30 minutes of valuable learning. In today's episode, we are going to talk about emotional culture and its impact on organizational performance. The key ingredients why I took this particular topic. This is one of the areas most of the organizations are forgetting to highlight in terms of building their performance. To discuss this, I have one of my favorite person in terms of emotional culture. When I talk about emotional culture, it's all the way from New Zealand. Um, Let me introduce him. He's the founder and master game maker at Riders and Elephants. And Rider and Elephant design games to help people connect through conversations. He is on a mission to humanize the workplace and shine a light on the power of irrational economy. In 2018, after 4 years of development, Riders and Elephants successfully launched the Emotional Culture Deck. The Emotional Culture Deck is a card-based tool used in 40 plus countries by over 100,000 people worldwide. Organizations including IBM, Netflix, IAG, Starbucks, and some of them. All Riders and Elephant games unlock emotion-led conversation about workplace, culture, customers, individual well-being. When he's not making games, he's on the river with his wife and their, beagle flying fishing, fly fishing, playing golf, or out on the cricket field, which I think Sri Lanka and New Zealand comes in the same field because he still play professional cricket. That's wonderful to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome Jeremy Dean, founder of Riders and Elephant and the Emotional Culture Deck. Jeremy, welcome to Cafe.
Wow, thanks. Azeem, amazing. I am very humbled and grateful for that introduction, and especially bringing up fly fishing, my beagle, my wife, some of my other passions outside of my day-to-day work.
Yeah, that's emotionally connected, right? So you can't forget that.
No, we can't. Ironically, on LinkedIn profiles, normally people leave, if they add their hobbies at all, normally they leave them to the bottom. Yeah. And I always wondered why we put that stuff at the bottom till last, when potentially they're the things that make us most human.
Absolutely. So Jeremy, first and foremost, thank you very much for joining me for this 30 minutes of conversation. It's a play, it's an afternoon, I think lunchtime for you. The topic, right? It's one of your DNA with you. Emotional culture. We're talking about emotional culture and its impact on organizational performance. As I mentioned on the introduction, it is really important that most of the corporate leaders or the corporate environment has forgotten this emotional culture. They have been talking about cognitive culture, behavioral culture, values, beliefs, and norms. But this particular element is really important because still the organization is running on people. People have emotions. If we don't identify that, I think we are going to make a big mistake, throughout the journey. In that aspect, my first question, Jeremy, for you is, when we say emotional culture, what does it mean for you?
Yeah, amazing question. And I think about this a lot, and I've thought about it on a daily basis for the last 6 years. But emotional culture to me is simply how your people are feeling or should be feeling at work. That's it. How people are feeling or should be feeling at work. Because you touched on it really beautifully there. We're not rational beings. our behavior is governed by emotion, whether we'd like to believe it or not, whether we believe the science and the research into this. How we behave is governed by our emotions, and the culture of an organization is the sum of its people. And if it is the sum of its people are governed by emotions, yet most of the conversations we have about workplace culture, about performance, don't touch on emotion at all. And so emotional culture for me is how people are feeling or should be feeling at work. And it's often, this is not my line, but Sigal Bassard and Mandy O'Neill, who are the professors behind this research. And they're the ones who came up with the term emotional culture. They say that every organization has an emotional culture, even if it's one of suppression.
Absolutely.
And more often than not, leaders, unfortunately, are suppressing emotions in the workplace. They are not encouraging them or fostering them.
No. You came on a point very nice. Leaders are not looking at that particular point. Is it they are afraid that they're going to touch something really personal element because they're going to get a worm of can picked up or something like that? What do you think?
Yeah, for me, there's two things. The first one is a lot of leaders don't have this conversation because of their own emotional discomfort. They are themselves uncomfortable speaking and talking about emotion, especially in the workplace, but importantly at home and outside work. And so that becomes a barrier. We can't have this conversation because it's uncomfortable for me. Although many leaders aren't aware that that's the case.
Absolutely.
And the second thing is, if we spend the vast majority of our lives at work, then it's I think very challenging for you to tell your people they have to bring somebody else to work and leave their emotions or leave their full selves at work, because that takes willpower, that takes effort. And we don't have that. If we want to be focusing on performing at our best, then we have to understand as leaders, what are the emotional drivers, because emotion drives behavior. Those are the two things.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're really on the spot on that element. But my question is, why organizations need to focus, or why it's important to focus on employee emotion? Because if we can answer this question, I think many of the leaders, many of the organization corporates can really look into it. Because I do a small, I do have a small tool where we can look into what is emotional culture, where we can see what do they feel at the moment, but how do they want to be felt. So we can find the difference. But it's no use we do so much of research, but if you don't understand or let the leaders know why it's important to focus on employee emotion. What would be your take, Dee?
Well, if I was to flip that and say, and building on the last question, I guess, is that I think a lot of our fear is that we're worried about unpleasant or negative emotion coming up and our inability to handle that or to cope with that conversation. But the irony is, and the most important thing to remember, is that even unpleasant emotions are indications of what's happening in our people's lives, in our personal lives. Unpleasant emotions, or what some people might call negative emotions, they impact how we approach people, our curiosity, our motivation, our drivers. Yet we don't want to explore that because we're worried about the flip side of it, the unpleasant things that might surface. The reality is, I think there's a responsibility on all leaders to have this conversation, because if leadership is about serving other people, to quote Simon Sinek, leaders eating last. If it's about us serving other people, then the best way to serve those people around us is to understand their drivers, their motivations, their fears, their hopes. And a lot of that is pinned or underpinned by our emotions, how we feel or don't feel. And those things give us clues to why we're performing well, why we're not performing well, why we're not behaving the way we hope our people are behaving. And so those things need to be explored, but we don't explore them because there's a taboo. It's not culturally acceptable in many places. But what I've come to learn after using this game for 7 years and with hundreds of thousands of people is that we do want to talk about it. We've just never been given permission, and we don't have the tool. We don't have the labels.
Fantastic. I think one of the reason where the employees itself also not coming up to show their emotion, one would be their insecure feeling. What do you think?
Insecure is an emotion in itself that a lot of us feel on a daily basis. I think, funnily, kind of funny, a lot of us are feeling it, but we don't know. A lot of us are feeling it because we don't have the ability to share the fact that that's the case, where we either feel also shame about being vulnerable and sharing that with others. But there's strength in vulnerability. And if you're able to share with me that you're feeling insecure or doubt about something you're working on, that's vulnerability that invites reciprocation, because I'm going to be far more likely to then also respond and say, hey, this is where I'm at. And currently my doubt and insecurity around a project I'm working on is paralyzing me. It's stopping me from taking the next step to deliver what I need to deliver. It's not the fact I don't have enough time. It's not the fact that I haven't put enough attention on it. It's because that I'm feeling doubt and uncertain and a little bit paralyzed because of what's in front of me. That's literally something that's happening to me at the moment, but I have the words to describe that. So I have a better awareness of that. Whereas I think we need to nudge our people, our employees, our organizations to develop that same self-awareness, because it will help unlock what the interferences are, what the blockers and what the barriers are to our people performing.
Absolutely. I think that's where the leaders need to come into picture, build that awareness on emotional intelligence, right? Build that self-awareness, where Dr. Susan David says on her book on emotional agility, labeling the emotion will help you to understand your emotion. I think those are the things I think now we need to inject in corporate arena. Fantastically said. With that line, I want to ask the next question, Jeremy. How does emotion affect work performance? You did share a little bit. And if you have certain some examples which you have already done with some of your clients, any research you have done, if you can share with us, if you have numbers, it'll be very much helpful for the listeners to understand as well.
Yeah, so the majority of the research I quote and is at the core of this game is from Sigal Bassard and Mandy O'Neill. They are the worldwide experts in this field. I've just taken their research and turned it into a game. And I feel as if my superpower is simplifying complex concepts. And so I've taken their 10, 15, 20 years of research into this concept of emotional culture and turned it into a card game, which we can play. So my background is in sports and playing games, and I like to simplify things. And by creating a game, it's made it easy. However, the research itself is really evident, and we could share some links to this research, hopefully maybe in the footnotes to your podcast, right?
Yeah.
But how the emotions of your people, the emotional culture of your team, how that's influencing satisfaction, job satisfaction, the motivation of your employees, connection, how people connect with each other, engagement. And now, how many times have you been with a client or an organization that have said, we want to increase the engagement of our team? And it's a big, hairy question, not realizing that understanding emotion is where we could unlock engagement of our people. Burnout is one of the big. There's a massive crisis in workplaces around the world when it comes to burnout, emotional exhaustion. So the emotions of your people, the emotional culture influences burnout of your people. It influences teamwork. It influences absenteeism. There's almost not one part of an organization that emotions and emotional culture doesn't impact. However, we tend to ignore that and focus on values, purpose, vision, mission, all those beautiful things that Patrick Lencioni and Jim Collins have said are important, but yet we are overlooking a really important but vital part that impacts all of those things. And there's a really amazing fellow called Dr. Mark Brackett. And so he's the head of emotional intelligence at Yale.
Okay.
And he talks about how emotions matter for three main things. There's five, but I think there's three main things here. One is attention, what we put our attention on. And if an organization wants to grow or wants to improve, it needs to understand how we focus on things and what we focus on. And emotion impacts our attention. The second one is relationships. All organizations are made up of people, but emotions impact relationships. They give us signals whether to approach or avoid. How often have we walked down the street or in the workplace and we've come across somebody and for some reason we feel something that says, oh no, I need to avoid. That impacts relationships. Or the opposite, it says I want to, or a feeling I've got that makes me want to approach, and that impacts workplace relationships. the culture of the team. And the final one, I think, is creativity. Emotions impact creativity. If we are constantly experiencing unpleasant emotions, we're not going to be as creative. We're not going to be great problem solvers because we're always going to be in a part of our brain which is fight or flight. And so all of these things happen on a daily basis with teams around the world. And I think there's some really interesting aha moments I've had. And I think the main one, I'll share one particular one, which is related to our game to a certain degree. But we went through the process of helping a digital company define the top 3 things they wanted their people to feel, and they needed to feel those to be successful. And the top 3 things that they didn't want their people to feel, but they might from time to time. So the pleasant emotions that were important to their success, and the unpleasant ones they needed to manage or cope. And I can't remember off the top of my head the exact 3 emotions for each, but there was a moment when they went, wow, okay, so we want our people to feel free, inspired, and brave. We actually want our customers or our clients to feel those things too. And we don't want our people to feel paralyzed, alone, and disconnected. And they said, wow, we don't want our clients to feel that either. And there was a really great moment for us to think about emotional contagion. And emotional contagion is this concept where we catch each other's emotions like the cold.
Okay.
And if your people are experiencing unpleasant emotions, then your customers, your clients, your stakeholders will be far more likely to also catch those unpleasant emotions, and vice versa. And I think if there's one thing that we could convince leaders why this matters, is that if you are working with a team where the number one stakeholder is a customer, is serving customers, ask that person to say, well, what's the biggest impact on those customers? And more often than not, it's your people. And if your people are experiencing negative or unpleasant emotions, your customers are going to be catching them. And we don't want our customers to be experiencing unpleasant emotions.
Fantastic, Jeremy. I think I learned very good new word, emotional contagion. I think I'm going to really bang on that. You're correct. That creates the ripple effect, right? When I go to work with unpleasant mood, all my work will be really unpleasant, and I'm going to not stop there. I'm going to influence my people, colleagues around me to that particular emotion. That's fantastic, Jeremy. I really like the point you brought it in. All right, so Jeremy, I really like the fact you brought in. Now, recently, I studied. I'm going through the research done by Microsoft in terms of hybrid work, right? And what sort of a paradox it has really brought in. And in that particular area, one says, the productivity has gone up, but at a human cost, right? The productivity has gone up comparing last year, but it has gone on at a human cost. Now, what's the human cost? As you said, their idea generation has gone down. Their brainstorming and collaboration has gone down. Their strategy, element ideas has gone down by drastically. They say the reason is that human connection is missing. Right, the human connection is missing. I think it really resonates what you shared with us. What are the things it goes, really have the impact of emotional culture being emotional to be attached with each other, right? So in that line, I know you did touch a little bit on it. I want to get a role of leader. How do we inculcate this emotional culture? What's his role in terms of bringing this emotional culture in, or as a whole, as a corporate, what should they do to bring emotional culture into their organization value system?
Yeah, lovely question and lovely thought. And my philosophy on this is not at odds with some really great thinkers in the space, but might be counterintuitive to it. Because I was brought up and I've learned to understand that leadership is about service in others and servant leadership, which is really powerful and really true. But when it comes to emotional culture and leading the emotional culture of an organization, leaders have to go first. We must go first. We must go first for 2 reasons. One, because of reciprocity. I'm obsessed with this concept of reciprocity. The notion that if I go first, then we'll get something in return. So if I share first, if I share how I'm feeling, the pleasant and the unpleasant, it invites reciprocity from my team. So it invites them to say, okay, it's normal, it's acceptable, it gives me permission, or it gives my people permission, then reciprocate. So leaders have to go first. The danger or the issue and the challenge with that is that it makes leaders uncomfortable. However, vulnerability is a strength. It is a superpower. It is the key to human connection. So coming back to your point about how we're at the human cost is the lack of connection. It's because, in my opinion, we don't have enough brave leaders out there who are willing to be vulnerable, because vulnerability connects people. And so the first thing is we must go first as leaders. We have to lead the way. Reciprocity is one of the reasons. The second is it gives people permission. It's okay. It role models the type of conversations, the type of behaviors, the type of, flips workplace culture, because normally workplace culture is only set from the top, and we only talk about it in terms of purpose, vision, and values and behaviors. And often we make really beautiful posters about it, and we create great videos, and we do great road shows around the country. But all of those things are at the expense of human connection when it comes to emotion, because we never provide the opportunity as leaders. We never give people permission to connect at a level which is more human than the corporate values culture system.
Fantastic. Jeremy, can I ask you one question on this? Because it did trigger out your leadership of your country. Fantastic example in terms of emotion. This is what my perception and my understanding. Do you think a country should have emotional culture index? Your country has?
Well, we've got a well-being index. Emotions are a part of well-being. Your well-being is built on your emotional health. I don't know if they've dug down into it that far, but it's a really interesting concept. I've thought about this in a slightly different way over time. So about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, we were traveling around South America and the bottom of North America, and we were in New Orleans. And at this time, I was grappling with my own concept of how I'd talk about culture, and I'd landed on flipping it. So instead of starting with values, talking about behaviors, and then not touching on emotion, my belief, my philosophy, our framework is that you start with emotions, the emotional culture, then talk about behaviors, and then talk about beliefs or values. And I was in New Orleans, and we were doing a tour of New Orleans, and we heard a walking tour, and the guy was talking about the culture of New Orleans and how on Sundays people dress up in their Sunday best to gather and to connect, but also to celebrate and to party, essentially. And this happened for hundreds of years because their philosophy was that their belief was, we don't know if we're going to live till tomorrow. So every Sunday or on a Sunday, we should get together and celebrate as if we might not. And it got me thinking about their values, their belief set, and then the behaviors that support that, but at the core of it, the emotions that drive that. And I wondered, even cities. So cities have a culture. So Colombo has a certain culture. Wellington, New Zealand has a culture. New Orleans has a different culture. People believe different things. They behave in different ways, and there's emotions that govern those in those cities. And I was like, there's subcultures within that. So even within New Orleans, there's subcultures. Within Colombo, there'll be subcultures. Within Wellington, New Zealand, there's subcultures. And I'm like, how do we celebrate all of these subcultures? Because in the world and societies, we have subcultures, but in companies, we don't talk about subcultures. And so I think there's something I'm continuing to explore that further. But within that, there's emotions that we celebrate and there's emotions we suppress. So I think we can drill down deeper. Not many people are willing to do that, though.
Fantastic. You can call me in if you want from my end, anything. So because I'm really curious to bring that awareness among the community as well, because that's where we go wrong, because we don't understand the emotional aspect of human being and how each religion or caste or race might bring certain emotional element where we can build around a nice, lovely place to live, right? Fantastic. So I'm coming to your core area, right, Jeremy, right? How can emotional culture deck, the game you were talking about, you have built it with a lot of research, help to build emotional culture gap, right? I know you have run a lot of workshops with a lot of leaders, with organization. I think we named few organizations which have already done it. How can it help? so people can really dig deeper on building this element?
Yeah, the first part is the labeling. So what I've come to realize in the 6 or 7 years that I've been doing this is that the biggest barrier is that we don't have the labels. We don't have the emotion words. Our vocabulary isn't big enough or large enough to help us talk about emotion in the workplace. Because normally when you ask, how are you feeling? You might get, I'm feeling good or bad or not so great. If you're lucky, you'll get happy, sad, or mad. But we don't have the labels, enough access to the labels to describe accurately how we are feeling or how we want to be feeling. And so our game gives people the labels. That's the simplest and easiest and most efficient way to start. So by playing with a game that gives you the labels, you're able to connect with each other, because as a team, we can decide together which labels to choose. So which unpleasant emotions we don't want to have in our team environment, and which pleasant ones or positive ones we want to put at the core of our culture of our team. So at its core, a game like this and similar games that are out there give us the labels. They give our organizations the labels to connect us, because we'll be able to pick similar labels, and then we will be able to share stories about what they mean to us, how we could foster these emotions in our particular game takes you on a journey of going through that process, labeling them, deciding what's important, what's not important, and then what we need to focus on to develop that emotional culture.
Right. So Jeremy, can I ask you this? Is it playing this card? Should we, as an organization, should they start with from the top, from the leadership itself, or they should come from the bottom?
I think it's always an element of both.
All right.
If you had to tell me it could only be one way, I would still say it's most powerful when the most senior people in the team are the ones leading these conversations. You can have bigger and quicker impact when the most senior leaders, executives, are the ones who are endorsing this conversation, are leading this conversation. However, I am fully aware, after trying to do this for 7 years, 6 to 7 years now, is that that's not always the case. We can't always convince our most senior leaders that this is important. And so I'm also a big fan of bottom up and working from a subcultural level. So previously I would get quite disheartened and feel doubt and uncertain and almost paralysis if I couldn't get a senior leader to buy into the conversation.
Okay.
And eventually I realized, actually, maybe with those places we have to start at the bottom, and we just find individual teams, small teams, and we start really small, and we start with a 10-person team and help them. And what that does is it creates a reference point. So other people will be looking and going, oh, what are you doing there? That's interesting. Can I ask about it? Can I learn from you about what you're doing? And it creates an element of scarcity, almost that fear of missing out. It makes it visible. And so it is also, I think, important to be able to build from the bottom up. You can go both ways depending on what the appetite or the motivation for the organization is.
Fantastic. So Jeremy, thank you very much for sharing all those insights about emotional culture. Before I let you go, I want to ask you something. Can you give one tip for our listeners? Our listeners are from more than 42 countries, 150 plus audience. What would be a final tip you can share with our listeners, how one can build emotional culture, might be their home, might be their community, might be their organization, or there might be leaders who are planning to take over the country and run the country. What would your one particular tip you can really influence people to get into this emotional culture?
Can I break the rules and give you two?
Yes, please.
The first one is start small. Start really small. I've often become paralyzed myself thinking about how much impact and how much change I'd like to see, but then come across roadblocks and challenges, which then causes me to doubt myself or be uncertain about what the way forward is. And I'm a really big believer that small things can have a disproportionate impact. And so instead of looking to change the biggest thing, what about if we look to change the smallest thing that we know will have a big ripple effect? So start small. Start with one person that you trust or that you admire or you have a connection with, and then find another person, and then find another person, and go about it slowly, because those things will take time, but that will be the most interesting part. So the first one is start small. And the second one for me, when it comes to my game, is to call it a game. Often people are scared of this conversation. If we say we want to sit down and have an important conversation about the science of emotions and the impact on human behavior, that might alienate you, or that might disconnect you, or that might cause people to become cynical or skeptical.
Because of the labeling, the wording.
Because of the labeling.
Yeah.
Because of the labeling, and people were uncertain and skeptical of that. And so I say with our tool, it's a game. Play it, use it as a game, because that becomes a Trojan horse, and it allows people to come into the conversation and realize they can have it before you've scared them off by using too much of the science. So start small and play with our tool as if it's a game.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I like the second one you said, play, because play brings a lot of element in terms of how people can really feel and put it out, because they become their childhood, right? When you start thinking of play, we go back to our childhood. Fantastic. So Jeremy, that's the time that we have for today. My key takeaway today is emotional contagion, which can create that ripple effect, create that environment. It's what you are. So make sure your emotions are really understand, labeled it, and act upon it. I believe our listeners got plenty of takeaways. And talk about this emotional culture. I'm a person who really advocate for emotional intelligence and emotional culture, because that's what it needs. So that's what the time what we have for today. So thank you very much, Jeremy, founder of Riders and Elephants and the Emotional Culture Deck. Jeremy, thank you very much for joining in today. And all the listeners can follow Jeremy on his social media platform, and log on to www.ridersandelephants.com to check out some of his fantastic work, which he have done, which with a lot of passion. And he has been really improvising, because I'm really following him. I'm getting a lot of newsletters, a lot of new stuffs are coming up. So hop on to the website and see what Jeremy does, and some fantastic. Jeremy, finally, thank you very much for checking into the cafe and sharing your wonderful experience with us.
Thanks, man.